You try to take in every tip that they're giving, and that's great. You have a lot of knowledge, but then you're not doing anything with it because you feel stuck and you don't know where to start.
So how do you go from acknowledging I am burnt out by languaging burnt out from languaging to where do you go from there? Hello, Angela. Welcome back to my channel.
Hi, so good to see you again.
Yes, it's been a long time. Recently, you spoke at Women in Language. Your talk was one of my favorites. So if you wouldn't mind giving us just a recap or an overview of what you spoke about.
Yeah, okay. So my talk was about self-awareness in your language learning journey, specifically in staying the course, because, in the beginning stages of learning a language, you're like really motivated. You're on fire with that passion and that drive to learn. But as you go through and you start to get to those more advanced levels or like the intermediate plateau, that motivation kind of takes a dip. And I think a very important part to staying the course is having that self-awareness, not just of your personality, but also your interests, the things that make you tick, and then what you want to get out of your language learning. Now, by that, I don't mean as if it's a transaction, because that was a conversation that did come up on Twitter, and it was a good point. It's not a transactional thing, but rather it's like, what is your ultimate goal? And I know that can change through time, but it's good to have something to look at and keep in mind as you're journeying. I started off with all these attempts at trying to learn another language. I grew up only speaking English, even though my mom's a native Spanish speaker. And throughout that time, I had been taking Spanish in middle school and high school, got tired of my slow progress, and then made some other attempts at other languages, and I just could never make it stick. I never got to a point where I was satisfied with my level, and I would keep giving up. And then eventually I realized one summer, well, first of all, the turning point was when my teacher said right before our senior year of high school that our class would be taught completely in Spanish. No English was allowed. She wasn't going to use any. We were not allowed to use any. And I was immediately catastrophizing. I was like, oh my goodness, I am going to be doomed. I'm going to fail the class. If I want to be able to speak this language, I'm just going to have to do it outside of class, because whatever we're doing in class just isn't enough. And at that point, that's when I started using Spanish at home, and then got to a level where I was very satisfied, felt conversational. And then after that, that led into majoring in Spanish and French. Towards my senior year of college, university, things started getting a bit difficult. You know how you reach a certain point in your studies and it's getting close to the end and you're starting to feel a bit tired of the subjects that you're studying? Well, it was kind of getting to that point, but then I realized I was starting to burn out. I thought it was just a rut at first. I thought, okay, maybe I'm going through a difficult period because I don't enjoy all of the classes that I'm taking, but maybe I'll get through this. Well, then I jumped immediately from undergrad to grad school in a program that uses languages. It was interpreting and translation. And this was a rigorous 1-year program. It was accelerated, lots of classes and hours and credits stuffed into 1 year. Very intensive, stressful environment. And it didn't allow me a lot of flexibility to use my languages in a low pressure environment. I mean, as I was going through that year, I really started to burn out a lot. And by the end of that year, I got to a point where there was still this desire to use languages, to speak them, to watch TV and immerse myself. But even though the desire was there, every time I tried to get myself to use the languages, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And on top of that, not only could I not bring myself to do it, but I was actually frustrated. And whenever my mom, who I would consider a safe person to use Spanish around, even when she would try to speak to me, I would get frustrated. And I'm like, why am I upset? Because she's somebody that I can trust. She's not going to be evaluating me like a classroom environment. And at that point, it just made me take a step back And whenever I'm going through something difficult, the way that I try to work through problems is to find out why and
Yeah.
to really analyze them and dig deeper. And that's what I did. And then that's when I realized, upon looking back, thought, what changed? What could be the reason why I'm feeling this way? What happened specifically during my grad school program? Because that's when I noticed a huge change. And that's really when I got into the idea of language and mindset, because during that time, I was doing a bit of research on languages and anxiety, specifically foreign language anxiety. And I just became passionate about psychology and languages together, like how mindset affects your learning. And because in that situation, I realized that what happened was it seemed to be something to do with my mindset
Mm.
and those situations that affected my learning.
Can you talk us through how you approached analyzing the situation? I feel when I am worried or stressed about something, how I work through it is by talking to people I trust. I will just talk everyone's heads off, close people to me, and I will be very emotional. I will journal about it and I will cry about it. But it's a new process I'm working towards to really analyze and write about it and journal it out logically. So, how did you approach really getting to the root of the issue?
I did journal a lot because I'm a big journaler. I love writing things down. It just really helps me with those like the introspective side. When I'm writing things down, I have more time to actually, and you could also erase what you write and reword it. And
Yeah.
I basically started from zero. I wrote down my entire language journey from when I started back in middle school, even a little bit of when I was a kid, and how my mom would teach us a couple of words here and there, us being my sister and I. And I went from that in detail all the way to present day,
Wow.
and just reflected on that and saw, okay, what out of that did I like? What was working for me? Why was I so happy during a certain period? And then how did my attitude start changing? So the journaling really did come in handy. And I actually got that idea from Elena Gabrielli, because at last year's Women in Language conference, she did give a talk on that.
Yeah, that's great. That is so cool. And did you come to any like new insights or action points? Like, where do you go from after you've acknowledged I am burnt out uh, in language learning, which is quite a unique thing that I don't think many people talk about. There's life
Mm.
burnout, and then there's language learning burnout, which is they can be separate. You can not be burnt out in your life, but you can be burnt out in a specific language, for instance. So how do you go from acknowledging I am burnt out by languaging, burnt out from languaging to where do you go from there?
See, this has been very difficult because the way I'm talking about it now might make it sound like it just happened overnight. But really, this started in 2018 when I realized something was very wrong.
Mm,
One thing that helped that you also mentioned, aside from the journaling and analyzing my situations and trying to see them from outside of myself,
mm,
is talking to people. I actually did share with a friend recently. This was a few months ago. We were catching up. We had studied abroad together in France, and we both love languages. We both took a Korean class together. And I was telling her about my experience because she knew that I loved languages but didn't know what had happened over the past 2 years. And one thing she mentioned that was really eye opening was that it sounded like I was traumatized in a way.
mm,
And I was mind blown when she said that, because I hadn't thought of that. I thought, okay, well, I was going through a very bad period of anxiety or just a stressful time in life, but I never thought of it as trauma. And the
mm.
nice thing about talking to somebody else is that they have the advantage of seeing your situation from outside of you without all the thoughts that you have that may be blocking um, really what you need. Like, they have clarity that maybe you can't see because you're too close to the situation since you're involved in it. I actually, this isn't something that I talk about online, so I guess this will be a first to mention, but I have been going to therapy
Mm.
for a few years. I've been learning a lot about mindset, how our mind works. And in those sessions, I realized I'm really interested in this subject. And so I further research about it. And in doing that, that has also really helped me in applying that to language learning. I'll give an example. Catastrophizing. I didn't even know that that was a real word.
Yeah.
And I heard it and I looked it up and I thought, wow, this is very much me. It's when you take a situation and you imagine the worst case scenario
Mm,
is going to happen, and it's not if it happens, it's when it happens in your mind. When this thing happens, life is over as you know it. It is going to be a disaster, a catastrophe. And that was something that I thought, well, I wonder if I have these kind of thoughts in my language journey too, not just in
mm,
my life.
yeah.
Because, like you said, there's life burnout and language burnout, but that also means just like burnout could be separate things. When you read about something else, you could also apply it to language learning, even if it's something completely different.
For sure. Yeah, thanks for being so honest. I'm also seeing a not necessarily a counselor or a therapist, more of a life coach figure. And it's really helped me rethink about how I take decisions and what are my values. And her and she and I don't know how to English, we have spoken about different values applicable to even as granular as my language learning and my job. And it really helped me to just identify like what am I looking for in language learning? Again, like you said, not transactional per se, but what are my values? I actually have my notebook right here. And I think one of my values, a few of my values are learning, leadership, purpose, development, independence, efficiency, creativity, and confidence. By looking at what is really important to me, let's say creativity, then I can really align that and say, is learning this language or more higher level, is spending so much time on language learning fostering creativity in me or leadership or mastery or something? And that's been really useful to me. And I think as you mentioned, psychology or just introspection and self-awareness on in your life in general applied to language learning is also very, very beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because that is exactly what I'm trying to get at, is that you can apply these things that you hear from totally different situations. That is not a language learning thing that you're doing with that life coaching, but yet at the same time, you could take those values and see, does everything I'm doing in my life, which would include the language learning, does that
Mm,
line up with my values? And
yeah.
sometimes you'll find that if it doesn't line up, that's what could cause burnout in
Yeah.
the long term.
What would you say? How can someone identify that they are burnt out by a language? I think we all, as language learners, go through the intermediate plateau. We feel frustrated by grammar. We cry about verbs. Some of us, the more emotional kind. But that's a bit different from like just reaching intermediate plateau and going through the normal frustrations of language learning is very different from burnout.
Part of it is looking at your emotions. Like I mentioned earlier in my own story, that feeling of frustration and irritability that I had, even when a well meaning person who I knew was not going to grade me on how well I was speaking or writing, and someone I could be open and vulnerable with, if I feel irritable towards that person, then that's an indicator that something isn't right, because that normally would not be the case. Or if you're finding that things that used to bring you enjoyment aren't bringing you enjoyment anymore. Kind of like you said, it wasn't about the people, it wasn't about the culture, it was about the language specifically.
Yeah.
And I was finding that was the same thing. Like I said, that desire was still there to use it. But then when it came to actually doing it, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So I would say that's probably how you would know
Mm.
that you're burnt out.
Would you say there's also a level of maybe performance anxiety in the sense of I want to be so good at this language and I've worked at it for years and years and I don't see myself progressing and therefore I'm maybe embarrassed to use it or I'm worried that what people are going to think. Is that can that contribute? Is that a thing?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. I feel like burnout happens when you're not aware of what's going on and you allow a negative situation or circumstance to be the norm for too
Mm.
long. And once you get used to that and you become complacent and you don't even realize that the situation is damaging you, then I feel like that's where burnout can happen. The burnout will stem from something. And it very well could be performance anxiety. So it goes back to looking at your thoughts. And you mentioned one right there, like, oh, if I've been studying this for so long, but I haven't reached my desired level by now. And that would be the thought. And then what follows that thought is an action, which means you don't feel comfortable speaking it. So you're probably not going to allow yourself to speak it, whether you realize it or not, because your nerves are getting in the way.
Yes, yes.
And then once you do that, it's a chain reaction. If you're not speaking it that often, then it's going to become a habit where you're used to letting that fear or anxiety get in the way. And then ultimately, that's how you sabotage yourself in learning, when
Mm.
you just let those things become habits and you don't catch them early on. It's so much harder to get out of burnout.
Yeah, those are some great points. I liked what you said about burnout happens when you're not aware of what is going on. And that actually ties back nicely into this whole concept of self-awareness in language learning and life. So what would you say are some things we can do to become more self-aware apart from journaling per se?
Apart from
Or
journaling,
is that it? Is
I
that like the best? No, really, is that the best way to be more self-aware? And if it is, how do we begin with journaling? What if there's someone who just doesn't like writing at all, but they want to be more self-aware?
that's what makes it difficult for me, because the whole thing about language learning and people and psychology is that we're all so different, which is really neat and exciting. Maybe you're not a journaler, but maybe you have a different way where you can really sit down and analyze things. Maybe it's drawing. Maybe it could be like a mind map where you're just writing down certain words, but
Mm.
not actually writing out an entire story of your language learning
Yeah,
journey. Just get creative, know what you like to do and how you would like to, or what would best serve you in
yeah,
like organizing those thoughts. And then
exactly.
that's where you could go from there.
Yeah. I like that you said organizing your thoughts. Maybe we need to think more of the concept of what we want to get at, which is organizing our thoughts rather than the means to do it, like this journaling is the way to go, or counseling or life coaching or whatever. For me, I also like taking walks. I live near
Mhm.
some really nice parks, and I found that just disconnecting from leaving my phone at home and taking a walk really allows me to have a lot of time to think. And that is also where introspection and self awareness can come from, when you're alone with your thoughts. But exactly like you said, everyone is different. And I feel like maybe a younger audience or younger language learning community are very impressionable, and the people they look up to and the people they see, oftentimes what that person recommends or said is seen as, oh, this is the way to go, or this is the way, this is how you learn languages even, or this is how you take notes. And I think it's natural, normal human behavior to look to people you admire or people who are older than you to see how they do things. But I also think it's important for you and I as content creators to instill these virtues into people, that you are your own person. You can look around and take and see what is out there, and but ultimately find what works for you.
Yeah, exactly. And while it seems like a lot of content creators are talking about the same subjects, there's still that uniqueness. There are so many methods and resources out there that are tailored to different learning styles created by different people who have different learning styles. If you pressure yourself to try to make one thing work and it's not working for you, then you're going to end up feeling discouraged and thinking that you're not good at learning a language. And it's nice to try to emulate the people that you really like, but their learning style might be different from yours, or even if it's similar, you might find that a resource that they recommend doesn't work for you as well as another one.
And I think that's part of self awareness as well, trying different methods and learning about what works for you and what doesn't. For me, I used to do a lot of flashcards because I thought this is what everyone says. And we were taught at school actually, like learning methods, how to take notes and everything. And flashcards and mind maps were like the way to go. And I was like, well, okay, if the teachers say so, then flashcards it is. And I was like, this is so boring. Like just looking at single words on a paper, I am so bored. And I actually recommended flashcards in my like older videos because I was like, well, this is all I know. But it
Mhm.
takes a while to get to a space where you realize, it's not really working for me. I don't like it. Let me try something else. And that's totally okay. And many language learners, myself included, we spend so much time at the beginning of our journey trying to figure out what is the best, most optimal way to learn this language. And honestly, I think it's better to just try, start somewhere, wherever it is, rather than spending too much time trying to find the optimal schedule, method, apps. It's a lot better to just dive into it head on. What do you think?
I think so too. It can be so overwhelming. And one term that I hear, and I hear this all over the place, it's analysis
Oh
paralysis.
my goodness, yes. My story of
I
my life.
Right? Us overthinkers, we are great at doing this.
Mhm.
You know, you're taking in hours and hours of content, watching other learners on YouTube be where you want to be at. And you try to take in every tip that they're giving, everything they write on their blog or on social media. And that's great. You have a lot of knowledge, but then you're not doing anything with it because you feel stuck and you don't know
Mm.
where to start. So that, yeah, like people get really stuck there, and that's why they don't move forward, because they just don't do it. And that's where I was stuck in my
Yeah.
own language journey. I had a lot of knowledge of Spanish in high school, but it wasn't until I just started using it with my mom. You know, you got to start somewhere. You may not hit the right method or resource right away. It might take a little bit, but at least you'll be figuring something out, whether it works for you or not. You're still moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. That's important. In closing, do you have any tips for people who want to get back into language learning after they've gone through burnout?
Sure. So, when aside from the journaling, other things that you can do would be to slowly get back into language learning,
Yeah.
because I know like you might be feeling enthusiastic or you're worried even. This could be fueled by the fear of, what if I lose the level in my
Right.
language, and taking a break ends up being a negative thing for me and impacting me negatively. Well, you'll remember more than you think, because it really sticks, which
It
is
does.
insane. Like, it's
Yeah.
so cool. But go back into it slowly, baby steps, because if you try to jump back into it too quickly, it's just gonna bring you back to where you were
Mm.
again. And then you'll have to start all over again. And you don't
Mm.
want to repeat that process. So, baby steps, which can look like watching an episode of a TV show if you're feeling up for it. It can look like getting back into community and watching other language learners, or
Mm.
connecting with them on social media and seeing how they're using their languages, getting inspired, and seeing what you could do once you get beyond that survival level of your target language, and all the things that you can do with it, how you can use that language. Another thing that you could do, which is important to do throughout your language journey, whether you're burnt out or not, is to celebrate your successes, no matter how big or small they are, because it's so easy to overlook those small
Mm.
successes, such as having a conversation on the phone. Don't underestimate that. I hate having conversations in my native language over the phone.
Yeah.
And if you could do that in your target language, that is amazing. The language community puts an emphasis on goal setting. And then there's other people who put an emphasis on having fun. And I think you need to have a balance of both of them.
Mm.
Goal setting is great, it keeps you on track. But the thing about goals is that when that becomes your main motivator, you lose being present in your language journey, because you're always looking forward instead of looking at right now, or even reflecting on what you have learned and being proud of that. And then one more thing that I would recommend is just making sure that the activities that you do choose to do are meaningful to you and that you enjoy. And it's important that it's meaningful to you, because if it has no meaning, you're not really going to feel motivated to do that
Mm.
thing.
Exactly. Those are some great tips. Thank you so much for sharing. It
Yeah.
has been amazing to talk to you again. I'm so glad we have stayed friends throughout all these years, and it's been wonderful watching your journey. And to anyone watching this video, please do check out Angela's language learning channel. I will link it in the description. It is full of wisdom and self-awareness and just great language learning tips. So do check that out.
Thank you so much, Lindie. I love being here and talking to you again.
Thank you so much. I will see you again, and thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you. See you hopefully soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.